Communication is a relatively simpler topic. It's a part of section 2, people in organizations. But it is significant in the sense that obviously you can always come across a direct question on communication, basically involving the types of communication or the barriers to communication. But I think even more importantly, since HRM, human resource management, or personnel management, is an extremely important topic. Communication happens to be a part of an integral part of HRM also. So one of the previous lectures, we've already discussed that HRM, primarily human resource management, is a combination. It's a blend of, recruitment, training, motivation, communication, development of an organizational structure, discipline, and of course, training. So HRM, keeping in mind that HRM usually it has a very high probability of being there in a paper. It's basically a summary of section 2, and communication, since it's a part of HRM, so it adds to the importance of this topic. Like I said, a comparatively simpler topic. So communication simply is the exchange of ideas or the transfer of ideas. There could be one-way communication, there could be two-way communication also. So the words transfer or exchange, both are applicable here. Transfer obviously could be used in case of one-way communication, and exchange could refer to, an exchange of ideas referring to or representing two-way communication. So needless to say, communication is something that is essential. I mean, keeping in mind how businesses are managed these days, it is next to impossible for a business to survive without having a sound communication system, because business is all about communicating with the customers. There's a billboard. This is a way of sending your message out to the customers, right? It's all about communication. You communicate with the external stakeholders. You communicate with not only the customers, the government, suppliers, retailers, government authorities, sometimes competitors. Then there's internal communication also. You have to be in touch with people within the organization, right? The employees, the subordinates, the superiors. So communication is essential to the success or effective working of a business. And communication can be classified into verbal communication when you're having a conversation. Could be a dialogue, could be a monologue, could be one way, could be two-way. Verbal communication is quick, though it is not on record. Then of course we have written communication whenever there's a documentary evidence. And verbal, obviously there's no documentary evidence, but in written communication there has to be a documentary evidence. Could be a notice, could be a memo, could be an appointment letter, something that is in black and white. It is more relevant to work of an official nature, you can say, or a formal nature. Then there's something that we call non-verbal communication also. Non-verbal communication basically represents the body language, movement of hands, eye contact, face expressions, body language, gestures. This is also considered to be a mode of communication, non-verbal communication. And basically, non-verbal communication is important in strengthening verbal communication. Like we are talking to someone, like we're having communication here. So, this movement of hands and body language, gestures, it helps a person, it helps the sender of the message in conveying his message more effectively to the receiver. And even it makes it easier for the receiver to understand or to comprehend the message. So it's verbal communication, there's written communication, we have non-verbal communication, and then electronic communication. E-com, electronic communication, this is probably, in the last few years, this has taken the shape of the most important mode of communication. This is the most important category. Electronic communication, whenever some sort of technology is involved, a device or a gadget is involved, we call it electronic communication. It's a type of communication that involves technology or a device. Could be visual, could be audio. So, these cell phones, the computers, even a fax machine, all of these come under, you know, the umbrella, or they're categorized as electronic communication. And electronic communication is so important that, you know, it has had a huge impact on how businesses are carried out all over the world. You know, the role of intermediaries, the role of wholesalers, for instance, it has gone down in importance because of this electronic communication. You know, the role of middlemen, intermediaries, because the sellers and the buyers, now they are able to communicate directly, and they don't have to rely on these middlemen, the intermediaries, the, you know, the wholesalers, the retailers. So electronic communication extremely important. And, you know, people who've done organizational structure, and we had a discussion on organizational structure some time back. In organizational structure, you know, if you refer to the structure, communication can be classified into vertical and horizontal communication also, right? This is another way of classifying communication into different types. You know, it could be classified into vertical and horizontal communication also, if you want. Vertical communication takes place between different levels of hierarchy. You know, a superior communicating with his subordinate, or the other way around. That is vertical communication, upwards, downwards. And horizontal communication is at the same level of hierarchy. One manager communicating with the other manager. Basically, to make sure that we understand this properly, what we have in a hierarchical organizational structure, that is vertical communication, and what we have in a matrix organizational structure, you know, matrix organizational structure, in which, you know, project teams are formed and people there from different departments, they interact horizontally. That's horizontal communication. And there's yet another way, you know, if you want to divide communication into different types, communication could be formal or informal also. Informal communication is the one in which, you know, the discussion is purely job related, work based. Formal communication, that's formal communication. When the communication is purely job related, you are discussing a project with your colleagues, that's formal communication. And informal communication is the one which is of a casual nature. You can discuss issues other than work also. You can discuss the weather, the politics, the, you know, anything, you know, sports, other than work also. That's informal communication, as the name suggests, right? So should not be difficult for us to categorize communication into different types. All forms are important, and they have their own importance. Like I mentioned in the beginning, verbal communication is quicker, but it's not on record. Non-verbal communication helps in supporting verbal communication. Written communication is on record. Electronic communication involves technology. It's quicker, and, you know, it's more popular, so on and so forth. Okay, this was one part. So while discussing communication, it is important that we have some idea about the barriers to communication also, right? The barriers to communication. Barriers basically, you know, are the factors that contribute towards the quality of communication. You know, barriers, these factors, they create hurdles, and if these are removed, the communication process improves. So basically, we need to discuss the factors that contribute towards the quality of communication, the determinants. So, you know, you can classify these determinants, these factors, these barriers into the following. Number one would be, you know, the chain of command. Again, it overlaps with the other topic, organizational structure. The length of the chain of command. You know, if the chain of command is long, usually the quality of communication is compromised. A long chain of command means basically a narrow span of control, that, you know, a lot of people are involved in the communication process, and by the time the message reaches the end receiver or listener, usually it is distorted. So in order to improve communication, we must shorten the chain of command, or if you want to rephrase this, we should widen the span of control. Shortening the chain of command is same as widening the span of control. That could be one factor, one barrier. Then other than chain of command, the skill of the sender and receiver matters, right? If the sender of the message and the receiver, if they share the same skills, communication will be of a higher quality. But if the skills are different, skills in terms of language skills, skills in terms of technical skills, if the skills are different, then the communication process might deteriorate. You know, if the sender is communicating in English and the receiver does not understand the language, obviously communication will fail. the sender is trying to send an email and the receiver doesn't know how to use a computer, communication will fail. The skill of the sender and receiver, that is also important. The number three would be something that we call stereotyped thinking. Stereotype thinking, if you go by the book, by the dictionary or the proper definition, stereotype thinking represents preconceived notions, having preconceived notions about others, being biased, being judgmental about others. If we tend to form an opinion about others without really giving them a fair chance to express themselves. So, if a manager in a business, for instance, is stereotyped, in terms of his mindset, or he won't be wrong to say he's suffering from this stereotype thinking, because it is disastrous for a communication process. So if he has a stereotyped approach, he would assess the performances of his workers, his subordinates, not on merit, not on the basis of how productive they are, but he would give importance to all the other irrelevant factors. He will have a biased opinion. He'll be judgmental about his subordinates on the basis of, it could be gender, or the social background, or the financial status, or maybe the appearance of the person. So this is, like I said, it is disastrous for the communication process. One must try and overcome this, because anyone who is stereotyped in his approach, that means he's not open to ideas, he's already formed an opinion, he has preconceived notions, and like I said, he's judgmental about others. So that's not good for a nice and smooth communication process, right? So stereotype thinking could also be labeled as a barrier to communication. So other than stereotype, we have jargon. Jargon, as you might be knowing, is the terminology that is used and understood by a certain group of people or a certain community. Those words, that terminology which is used and understood by the members of a certain community. It could be a community of professionals, doctors have their own jargon. It could be a community of friends have their own jargon. So you see, using jargon with a member of the same community improves communication. If a doctor uses that technical terminology with another doctor, it would make perfect sense to him. Or if a friend uses that jargon with another friend, it will make perfect sense to him. But when you start using jargon with a non-member, somebody who is not a part of that community, obviously communication will be compromised. He would not understand it. Like a doctor trying to use that technical terminology with a layman, obviously would make no sense to him. So jargon could be another factor that affects the quality of communication, right? And lastly, geographical limitations, or you can say geographical limitations and technology combined. You see, whenever physical distances increase, whenever geographical distances increase, a person moves to another location, another region, another city, another country, there will always be a deterioration in the quality of communication. That's an established fact. Whenever somebody moves to another area, city, country, etc., it will always have a negative impact on the quality of communication. That's for sure. Now technology will come into effect. Now you'll be dependent on technology. When you used to, they used to have an interaction with the person face to face, communication was of a higher quality. But the moment he moves to another area, now you're dependent on technology. So then the cost factor comes into effect. Sometimes, quite possible, there's a technological breakdown, the phone lines are down, or the internet is not working, or the fax machine is out of order. You're dependent on technology. So geographical limitations, when the physical distances increase, that will always affect, it will have an adverse effect on the quality of communication, right? And if technology is non-existent, if technology is not there, it's all over, then the communication process comes to a halt. But even if technology is available, of course it will play a huge role, like we always observe. But as compared to how it used to be in the past, when we used to interact with the person face to face, there will still be some deterioration or decline in the quality of communication. Geographical limitations, right? So altogether, these more or less 5 factors should be discussed or should be referred to whenever you're discussing a question on the quality of communication or how to improve communication, right? And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a separate topic in section 2, but it is even more important as a part of HRM. Human resource management is a very, very important part of our syllabus, perhaps the most important topic in section 2. So communication is a part of HRM also. Hopefully you have understood it. All right, Allah Hafiz.